to go on. I'm a believer that this team's going to win the national championship. Something stupid is coming out of his mouth. I don't know. Maybe it's just my age. He needs his vote pulled immediately. And of course, yes, a season like this has to have a name. Let's talk about something good about Justin Frye. What are you doing? The season of dreams. Ohio State, my guys, are either the best or the second best program in the history of college football. This guy is a bonehead. They love him. I question your judgment as an adult. I really do. I was a total hater. I know that for a fact, and I just don't get it. Get us back our sleeves and say, bring me that. That's the one I want. And welcome into Juckonbucks. Appreciate you so much for joining me today. A conversation with my buddy Sam from College Football with Sam. And this is a really interesting cat, man. I've been watching him since I started the show, since before I started the show. And I don't know what it is about his style, man, but it just sucks me in. I like the attention to detail. He thinks about everything. One of these type of people that just is in his head thinking of different scenarios, going over numbers. I think he's really, really good. And I wanted to have him on, have a conversation with me. Now, our style's very different, but we both do a solo show. I thought it might work. I think it was a pretty cool conversation. You guys let me know. But one of the things we got into, obviously, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon. He's a Big Ten guy. We also talk about the college football playoff, the things we would both like to tweak in the playoff, the Ohio State-Michigan game, the Ohio State-Oregon game coming up, and other playoff games. One thing we're hearing right now is a drumbeat to get to 16 teams in the playoff. People want 16 teams in the playoff because they want to include more good teams, which will mean less blowouts, and they want to do away with the byes. You can't do away with the byes with 12, so you got to add 4 more teams to do away with the byes. Now, that would be the same amount of rounds, and I would like to do away with the byes. Of course, I would like this thing to have stayed at 8 teams and done away with the byes, because I don't think you need to bring in 12 or 16 to find a most deserving national champion. I think 8 would have been plenty for that. But we know that's not what this playoff is really about. It's about the production of the playoff and the fun of the playoff. And look, I like fun. Fun's great. I already admitted I was wrong. I thought I wouldn't like this thing. I thought it would take away from some of my enjoyment of the regular season. It did not. It was an awesome regular season. And the playoff so far has been awesome despite the blowouts. We're always going to have the blowouts. There's not 12 teams that can win a natty. It's just what it is. But some using that argument as a way to prop up the 9-3 SEC teams that did not get in. Essentially, if you were to open it to 16, allow a South Carolina and Alabama, they would now make sure that there weren't so many blowouts because they're better than SMU and Indiana. Do I think they're better? I do. But this has never been just about the best. It's always been the best and most deserving. Don't know why the committee continually says the best. Did they never add and with the resume to support it? Because it's always been that. 2015 Ohio State proves it. 1 loss, number 1 or number 2 power rated team across the board, did not get in. 2023 Georgia proves it. 1 loss, number 1 or number 2 power rated team across the board, did not get in. The best with the supporting resume. If you go to 16 and you are a blue blood or a fan of a blue blood, the odds are huge that if your floor is 9-3, like I think most people think Ohio State's is, you're getting in every year. If you are a big time program that has a lot of talent on your team and you lose 3 games, you're in. What's that mean for Ohio State this year? Well, it means you could have lost Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. You still would be in. I don't like it. It's not the way I want the playoffs to be, but it's looking increasingly like we already know for sure we're going to see 14 minimum when they redo this in 2026. It's looking like we're also going to see this potentially move to 16. And if that happens, man, we're on our way to the next expansion. But I've heard people talking about this playoff being the most exclusive of any sport, so we shouldn't worry about going to 16. And they are saying 16 teams out of 134 Division I teams, not a big deal. It's still the smallest of any other sport. And if you've heard that on other podcasts, they are BSing you, or they're not too bright, because that is not what's going on here. There are 134 Division I teams. There are 68 Power 4 teams plus Notre Dame. That's 69 teams. How many Group of 5 teams get in? 1. So this playoff includes 15 of 69 teams. If you go to 16, pardon me. If you go to 16, it includes 15 of 69. That's 22%. 22% of the sport making the playoffs. The basketball tournament, March Madness, 68 tournament teams. There are 364 Division I hoop schools. That is 18%, which means if you go to a 16-team playoff, you are actually including more of the sport than March Madness is with 68 teams. And that's just the facts. So anybody telling you that this is the most exclusive playoff in all of sports is full of blue mud, particularly if you go to 16. And I'm against it, but I do want to incentivize big out-of-conference games, as you know. So Sam and I get into that, among a lot of other things. But before we get there, I want to talk about a couple of things. Number one, my dude from Akron, Ohio, from Hoban, Chip Trayanum, you remember him, Buckeye running back, won the game at Notre Dame, started off his career as a running back at Arizona State. Then he transferred back home to Ohio State, started at linebacker, ends up at running back. So Arizona State to Ohio State. Then he surprised us when he transferred to Kentucky. Chip is transferred again. And Chip is going to finish his career, most likely, at Toledo. This is bewildering. Chip, we're talking about a really talented kid, a really smart dude. And you got to wonder, man, if he could do it all over again, would he have changed some of these decisions? 1 year here, 1 year there, every year a different place. And the finishing place is Toledo. I feel bad for these guys, man. It just seems like you got a hot butt to go get playing time here. No, it's not working. Let me go here. And how does that look? You know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like he could have had, if he just stuck at Ohio State or stuck at Kentucky. It just seems like a shame, because you're young and you're antsy, and maybe these were the right decisions for him. Very well could have been. I'm just using him as an example. There's no doubt that situations like that happen a lot, and it's definitely not the right decision for all those guys. So maybe it's right for Chip, but he's just a smart, awesome young guy, and I hope that he gets to Toledo and is able to show out and make the league, because he's awesome. But that's not what you want to see, man. You just don't want to see it. So I feel bad about that. All right, let's get to our conversation with Sam. And welcoming into the show, my buddy College Football with Sam. Sam, your debut appearance at Juckonbucks and Menace to Sports. Appreciate you coming on to talk to me, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Juck. Thank you for having me on. I've been excited to do this show with you for a while. Like literally the second you reached out and asked, I've been excited. So let's talk some
Fantastic.
Buckeye football, college football, whatever you want to talk about. I'm pumped.
I love it, Sam. I love the way you think about college football. I love your perspective on things. You're someone that I started watching before I started my show, and I just enjoyed how prepared you were. I mean, you are someone who studies everything before you put stuff out there, and I think that is incredibly impressive. I was watching before you even came on the screen. I actually thought you were my age. You're a younger guy. You're still a college student. Where do you go to school?
I go to school at the University of Michigan. I picked them over Eastern Michigan because I've been a Michigan fan my whole life, and because it's a good university. So I'm going there, taking a few classes at a time. Typically in the fall, I only take a class or so, and then in the other semesters is when I take more classes.
So, a dyed in the wool Michigan fan. I just want to let everybody know who's watching. This is a very, very fair guy. He doesn't pull any punches. He talks very highly about Ohio State when they deserve it, very poorly about Michigan when they deserve it. So, a very fair guy is Sam. Sam, I want to start with the structure of the playoff. I've been railing on forever about these automatic buys. Now, some of my buddies, my buddy Chris Drew, he likes the automatic buys. When we look at the bracket, what it could have been if they would have seeded it 1 through 12, not only do I think it would have just been more fair, I also think we would have had much more competitive games instead of these blowouts that we got. These blowouts really upset a lot of people. Obviously, we were going to always have these blowouts. We had them in the 4 team. I don't know if people weren't paying attention, but what is your take on the structure of the playoff as it stands currently? What changes would you like to see when they readdress it in 2026?
So I understood in part the intent, because in 2023 you had Florida State left out when I think they deserved to get in. But to be fair, so did Texas, so did Alabama. In the BCS system, obviously, last season would have worked itself out with Washington and Michigan playing for the Natty, as those were clearly the 2 best teams from a strength of record standpoint. So I understood the intention. But as college football nerds, which is a channel that I really like and watch as much as I can, as they've pointed out, there aren't 12 teams who can compete for it all analytically. That's not the sport of college football. And Josh Pate has said before that it's like people want college football to be like a TV special when it isn't, with all these different storylines still at the end of the year, when really there are only a few teams that can win it all. I thought that last year, Ohio State and Oregon and Georgia were a few teams left out of the playoff that could have competed for a title if they were in. But I think last year was kind of a stronger year at the top anyway. There were more teams with high octane talent, and a lot of teams that, perhaps in part due to the COVID year, had a lot of older senior laden players.
Yeah.
In 2022, there were, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, maybe Alabama, if they got in, that could have won it all. And in 2021, Michigan was the 2 seed, and we saw against Georgia that they were nowhere near the level of Georgia, nowhere close. So
Right.
my proposal, and I kind of go back and forth on this in my own mind, is either you expand the playoffs to 16, because I don't like the buys. I think that if the buys are going to remain, it's like what you said. They have to be ranked as the best teams. It can't be. I don't like the idea of Boise State or Arizona State getting a bye. I don't hate it, but I feel like it will create better matchups if, let's say, Penn State and Texas, or maybe even Ohio State, due to the fact they had a stronger schedule than those two, also 2 losses, got one of the top 4 buys instead of Boise State or Arizona State. The other thing on my mind is maybe you contract it to 8, but expand conference championship week. And maybe you have a 4-team Big Ten championship playoff to determine the Big Ten champion. It's the same for the other conferences. And then the 8 teams that come out of that, 8 best teams that come out of that, are put for an 8-team playoff. Those are kind of my thoughts on it.
My initial thought was I always wanted to, when they were first discussing expanding, go to 8, do away with the buys. I did not like the buys to begin with. I think that home field advantage is a tremendous, and we just saw it play out, tremendous advantage. I don't think you need to add on a bye week. I think it's just a huge advantage. And when we talk about the way they've seeded it, which I don't think is going to last in 2026, I think that'll be gone. But we are hearing, obviously, we immediately heard that they were going to go to 14. The push for 16 has gotten louder and louder with the SEC 9-3 schools being left out. And I have heard most recently the push for, we will see less blowouts if we add these teams in. I am so against that, Sam. I feel like now you're trying to manufacture the entertainment, and I can hear the argument for this, for South Carolina over Indiana. Like, I'll listen to that argument. What I won't listen to is we'll get a better matchup if we choose that. I believe in meritocracy. They have gone about this for years, talking about the best team, right? But that's not always been true. It's been the best with the supporting resume. You look at 2015 Ohio State. They were certainly, by any power rating, the number 1 or number 2. We look at 2023 Georgia, same thing, but they weren't the best with the supporting resume compared to the other teams that got in. So it's never really been like that, but they've stuck with this best lingo. And I feel like it always reverts back to team talent, which I don't like, despite being someone who roots for a team who's always going to get the benefit of the doubt of that. I don't think that that is something that's good for college football. And I cannot stand bringing in Vegas betting lines or power ratings, because those also revert to team talent. And if we're going to do that, we can just do that in August and say, here's the teams that we know are going to have the talent to be there, and just cross everybody off the list. Where did you fall on the 9-3 SEC teams versus Indiana and SMU?
Indiana and SMU deserved to be in over all of those teams, sans, I would say, South Carolina, because South Carolina at least beat Clemson. They didn't have a bad loss to like a 6-6 Oklahoma or a 4-8 Kentucky. I know they lost to Ole Miss and Alabama head to head, but their lows weren't as low, and they actually, beat a competent non-conference opponent. Were playing very hot at the end of the year. I thought with Alabama, like, I get it, they beat Georgia. They're top 5 unanimously in power ratings, but preseason numbers are baked into that. I mean, this is the thing
Yeah.
that I was telling people on my channel when predicting Michigan games is, hey guys, the power ratings won't tell you how bad Michigan is because their national championship season is baked into the team's number. That's how power ratings work. And this is not like it's not even close to the same caliber team. It's good to do those preseason bake-ins, by the way, because that's why you get Ohio State ranked as high as they are, and that's accurate. That's why Oregon and Texas are accurately ranked where they are, but it doesn't work with all teams. And SMU, I mean, they lost to BYU by 3. They lost to
Right.
Clemson by 3. They were a few plays away from being 13-0. And Indiana, and I have been higher on Indiana than I should be, but that's a mistake that's been rectified in the past. They're a team that clobbered all of their bad opponents.
Mhm.
And Ohio State is, I don't know. I mean, at least a top 3 or 4 team in the nation, and they lost to them on the road, put up a good defensive effort. I think what needs to happen with this conversation is there needs to be a change in how we create schedules. I
Yeah.
think that's the solution to this, because I get that Alabama played a tougher schedule. I get that South Carolina did. Ole Miss did, but not to the same degree. I don't even like the conversation with Ole Miss. You lose to 4-8 Kentucky and you lose to Florida on the road. Get out of here. I don't want to
Mhm.
see you. And then it's the same thing losing to Oklahoma 24-3. It's I was on the side of SMU and Indiana, but after the playoffs, I think it's pretty clear that the conversation shouldn't be one or the other. There's like much deeper issues here.
One of the things that I have been talking about since this was announced is I felt that the committee was going to have a really huge opportunity heading into this first 12-team playoff to really try to cement that teams like Indiana, if you have a schedule that is not going to be conducive to getting you in the playoffs, but you need to schedule some out of conference games that are going to boost you up. And I think if they would have set that precedent, what you would have seen is, we've had this nightmare forever of scheduling out these out of conference games 7 years sometimes ahead of time.
Yeah.
I think that if we were to see them set a precedent, like, and come out and say, Indiana, you're being left out, and here's why. If you got a schedule like that, you need to go ahead and schedule some big out of conference games. And if we were to see that, maybe we would start to see teams only scheduling those out of conference games out 2 or 3 years, and rein that in so that they would have enough time to pivot off of that when they get a weak conference schedule. And it gives them the opportunity. Now you got the chance. If you think you got a team that can make a run at the playoffs, well, now you're seriously considering, I better try to schedule a decent out of conference game. And we're already seeing right off the rip, which I think is total hogwash, Alabama AD Greg Burns talking about scheduling less out of conference games when, to be honest, scheduling Wisconsin helped their cause. We've heard the same thing from Kirby all year when scheduling Clemson helped his cause. I think it's a bunch of hogwash, and I think the SEC is trying to get out of big out of conference games. They don't want to go to the ninth conference game. And I want that to be incentivized for everybody. I feel like Indiana deserved it, and I believe in merit. But at the same time, I do think perhaps they missed an opportunity to set the precedent right off the rip that everybody's going to need to change the way you schedule. Rein this sucker in, start scheduling a couple years out for your out of conference. And now the ball's in your court. If you want to if you want to roll the dice with a weak schedule, you're rolling the dice and it's coming back to us, the committee. So I would suggest you go try to test yourself in the out of conference. What do you think about all that?
I think that's a genius point by you, and that just gave me an idea for something. I don't watch the NFL that much, but I think that the NFL does their schedules like just a few months or a year in advance, if I'm not mistaken. Like it's not. Am I right on that or am I wrong?
I believe you're right. It comes out once it's announced every year, like, hey, the schedule's coming out, and everybody goes and looks at it. Yeah.
Okay, they should do that with non-conference games. Maybe they should just do that overall, given all the changes with conference realignment and things. I don't want college football to be like the NFL, but I also get that some teams, like Indiana, for example, the Big Ten scheduled Washington and Michigan on Indiana's schedule, and Michigan was supposed to be much better this year than what they turned out to be. And I think that some of their performances, like one we'll get into here later, I assume, kind of to a certain degree show that. But they weren't. They were 7-5, and they were a very poor quality team overall. I mean, I hated watching them. It was horrible. And yeah, it's bad football. And
Yeah.
it's not Indiana's fault that they were bad, but you can
Right.
change that by year to year, making sure that you're at least trying to schedule good competition in the non-con. And then for conference games, I think you can just do what you're doing. I mean, I like the current Big Ten scheduling. You keep some of the traditional rivalries, but you also make sure to try and balance it out. And occasionally, I think there's going to be one or two Big Ten teams every year that kind of luck out and get very favorable schedules. IU being one of them. And there are some in 2025 who will probably luck out as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's roll into that game, Sam. So obviously that was a shocker to maybe it wasn't a shocker to you. Maybe you were of the opinion that this game was in Ryan Day's head. I was not. I've defended him. I thought that the Buckeyes were right there in 2023, and some things went, it didn't go their way. It was a really good Michigan team, obviously, and then they fought tooth and nail. You go into this year's game, everybody thinks the Buckeyes are going to absolutely win that game for sure. Huge favorites at home, and it just it was a disaster. He played right into their hands. The only way they could have won, he served it up on a platter. He never pivoted, and a lot of Buckeye fans, which I talk to every day, just feel so angry about that game that they lost respect for Coach Day, that they don't support him anymore, that they've said, I've always supported him, but now I'm out on him. Unless he can make a run in the playoffs, I don't see myself being able to come back in on him. And then you see that Tennessee game and you think, well, maybe this is just a Michigan problem. But thoughts on the game, thoughts on the rebound with Tennessee?
Well, I was not of the opinion entering the game that that Ohio State had much of a shot or any of a chance to lose. In the preseason, I was kind of the opinion that now Michigan was in Ohio State's head. But as the year went on, I thought to myself, that's probably still true to a degree, but Michigan's horrible. I mean, their offense outside the top 100. The defense has the nation's best D line, top 5 talent on that side of the ball, and they weren't even top 20 for much of the year. It's just one of the worst Michigan teams that I have seen outside of the COVID year. So I was shocked watching the game, but a little bit before halftime, I got the feeling that it was going to be close until the end. But from my standpoint, Michigan fan wise, I did not believe that the Wolverines were going to win until they kicked the game winning field goal. I didn't think it was possible. It felt a lot to me like the 2021 game, where it was just like, this is actually happening. The analyst in me was shocked that um that Ohio State kept playing into Michigan's hands, but the minute they did that, I knew exactly why they were doing it. It was obvious that Ohio State wanted to come out, they wanted to bully Michigan the same way that Michigan had bullied them on the lines of scrimmage in 21, 22, and to a lesser degree 23, and it just didn't work. And the toughest thing they could have done in that game was not running the ball. It would have been passing to your receivers who are really good at downfield blocking and who are big and who are fast, and they just didn't do it. And that was the real it, it was it was probably the worst Ohio State loss. And I'm not an Ohio State fan. You probably know this a lot more about this than I do. Maybe the worst Ohio State loss since what, 1998, when Michigan State came in as this lowly team and upset them when they were ranked number 1. But then you add the rivalry component to it. And I mean, that game caused me to lose a lot of faith and belief in Day. Not that he's, going to get fired at OSU. I didn't pivot all the way to there, or even pivot to the point where I said he should be, but I finally understood the criticisms. And I finally thought to myself, yeah, this is unacceptable. I mean, this is the worst Michigan team in ages. It might be the worst team Michigan fields in a while. I mean, Michigan had 62 yards passing and 2
Yeah.
picks, and they honestly are kind of built like a service academy offense, just with no mobile QB, and they won. So that was kind of, it was jarring. I went live after that game and thought to myself, and said multiple times, I can't believe this happened. It's just
Yeah.
insane.
It was I mean, one for the ages, and yes, one of the absolute worst, most devastating versions of the game we've ever seen. And I do agree with you that I've kind of felt most of the year Ryan Day's been trying to change the identity of this team, of his program, to be more of a tougher program. And I thought that that was the day he was going to come out and cement that into the public perception. Why he didn't pivot off of that when it wasn't working, I think, is what irritates me the most. He's always been a pretty stubborn coach, but the fact that he was willing to go down in flames with that game plan, I think, is what bothers me the most. I don't have a problem in wanting to play classic Ohio State tough guy football. That's what this program has been built on. If you want to change your identity to that, I don't think you've recruited or assembled your team to that. But if you want to do that, it's a slow process. But the fact he never pivoted, I think, is what had so many Ohio State fans mad, because you got all these seniors that come back, and it just felt like a selfish move, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to get into all this psychoanalyzing, but it really did. It was very, very selfish. And he obviously sentenced us, the fans, to another year of listening to your side. And rightfully so. I'd be talking all that talk too. But you could certainly understand it after that game. Now, before that game, you were incredibly high on Ryan Day as a college football coach. After that game, how do you feel? How did you feel before that game? And in your rankings of coaches, I mean, I feel like you had him in your top 3.
I had him only behind Kirby Smart, and the thought process
Okay.
was that if he won it all, he would have been ahead of Kirby Smart, because while Kirby Smart has done a good job with Georgia this year, I've thought, well, he didn't win the SEC championship before that game. And then with what happened during Georgia Tech, I thought to myself, like, yeah, Kirby Smart's an elite college football coach, but I'm not quite putting him in the boat of Saban yet. Like, he doesn't have that spot locked up. And
Right.
what Day had done all year, and we talked about this before the show. I felt like ever since Simmons got hurt that they were kind of outrunning a speeding train, because the Big Ten has typically been all about the trench play, especially the inside, but trench play regardless. And that's something that Ohio State, even recently under Day, like in 2022, is very good at. One of the nation's best O lines and a talented D line, underperforming, but still really good. 2019, you had Chase Young and an elite offensive line that carried an awesome, by carried, I mean carried in the sense of supported an awesome rushing attack. And that's why they owned the Big Ten that year and were ranked number one in power ratings. I thought that with the Simmons injury, what happened after that injury in the Oregon game, the Nebraska game, parts of the Penn State game, the Purdue game where Judkins didn't even average 4 yards per carry, which watching that game and looking at the box score afterwards, all these things told me that, yeah, like the offensive line it's not terrible, because obviously the offense is still functioning and Howard isn't getting sacked every play, but it's broken and it doesn't have the necessary depth to do what Ohio State wants to do, which is bringing in Chip Kelly. We're going to run the football. We're going to have an awesome rushing attack. You can't do that anymore with Simmons down. And then McLaughlin sadly goes down. And that's like, oh, you need to pivot really quickly. And I was impressed with how in the Penn State game, when McLaughlin was still there, they pivoted. They abused Penn State's love of man coverage with speed options and using their speed to get to the outside. The defense was, well, acting like the number one defense, playing like the number one defense, as it looked to be in the preseason, or at least a top 2 unit. And then in the Indiana game, well, when they had this one drive where they basically went only passing plays and just got to the end zone like that. And I mean, I'm kind of going all over the place, but that's kind of the point. This team has been all over the place a little bit with how what they want to do versus what they need to do it's been separating. There's no more Venn diagram with what Ohio State wants to do versus what they have to do, because unfortunately the injuries and also Fry's lack of recruiting and development has pulled them away. You can't be a run-heavy team, in my mind, with this current set of circumstances, at least if you want to maximize your potential. But as we saw with Tennessee, if you want to be aggressive, if you want to go downfield, your offensive line is much better suited for pass protection. Your receivers are awesome, so no one is going to send the house at you, because that's just asking for Ohio State to pick up a first down or a big play. And that's really the Tennessee game is why I was high on Day for much of the year. The Michigan game is just, what are you doing? Why didn't you adapt? And why is this team built this way in the first place? Like, why didn't you go out and get more offensive linemen or change the offensive line coach? Because then a lot of these conversations that we're having right now with Ohio State's offensive line and their rushing attack and, can they do what they did again against Tennessee, wouldn't be necessary. It would be a different kind of discussion.
I think that's spot on. I mean, you're all over the place. You know what I mean? You're all over the place in your talent versus what it is you want to do. Came into the year wanting to slow things down to the slowest we've seen the offense running forever. One of the reasons I was so excited to get Chip Kelly in here is ever since 2019, Ryan Day was running 75 plays a game back then. It has gone down, 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 down. And not just because of the changes in rules, but I think they were at about 61 plays a game last year, and I was hoping to pick that back up. I think what you have on your team, your strengths are conducive to that. We see him come out against Tennessee. Before I get to the game, obviously, you heard what Herb Street said with the lunatic fringe, which, I talk to a lot of Ohio State fans, and sometimes I wonder if the Ohio State fans I'm talking to are just the crazy diehards, or if their opinions represent the fan base as a whole. And I went to the Ohio State Tennessee game, and seeing all the Tennessee fans and the amount of Ohio State fans that that did not choose to buy those tickets and did not choose to come, it was very clear to me that this is a large portion of the Ohio State fan base that was feeling the same way as the diehards, which is he's going to have to win me back in after that. And that's certainly the way it felt. You go into that Tennessee game, and all of a sudden, they come out running no huddle right off the rip. And I mean, it's just like you got all this firepower. You go and you use it. A wonderful display. I think it's going to win a lot of fans back. But when you look at him now, after the Michigan game and then after the Tennessee game, has your opinion changed? Whereas you had him slotted right behind Kirby Smart. Where do you think now? Has anything changed? The fact that they can't seem to settle on their identity, that things are so different from week to week. And again, you're going to have bad performances one week and a good performance another week. That's not what this is about. This is about your team identity and the fact that they just seem all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about before, and I'm just using this because I think it's the perfect analogy, but the Venn diagram of what Day wants his team to be versus how he's recruited is this pair of glasses right here. One of them is I want to run the ball, I want to be tough, I want no one to question my toughness, and I want to slow the game down. Well, that doesn't intersect at all with how you've recruited, where your perimeter talent is above almost anyone, almost definitively in the country. You have a great quarterback. Your O-line is built to pass block, and your defense is phenomenal. So if you go no huddle and you're up tempo and you're aggressive, and maybe that results in a 3 and out here and there, your defense can get you the ball right back. It's not going to be like Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, where your strategy of offense might snowball into your team and get you behind the chains. Your defense is that good. And I went from viewing him right behind Kirby Smart with like Lanning in the mix to now thinking that, you know, I think Lanning right now is the better coach. I think that there are other coaches nationally who are competing for that kind of top 5 area. And I just have Day up there for now because, well, like, I mean, against Tennessee, he showed that, you know, he can beat good teams. And I think it's more of a Michigan problem than a good team problem. But you still have areas where, like you said, the identity is all over the place. And I don't like that at all.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. When we look at the best of the best coaches throughout the years, you know exactly who they are. You know exactly what their team is. I feel like that is the marker of, a very strong leader. When we talk about a very strong leader, we talk about Dan Lanning. Coming into this season, one of my very first videos I did when I first started was a video about Dan Lanning, and I called him the scariest man in college football. And at the time, a lot of Buckeye fans were getting on me. This guy's never won a big game. He just lost 2 to his rival. If you couldn't see what was going on there, you just weren't paying attention, or you were just being a fan. The guy's got it all. He's a fantastic leader. The young men respond to him. When he turned down leaving after Oregon fans had been left by their previous 2 coaches for quote unquote better jobs, and basically told them, I can do everything I want to do right here. He got so much buy-in. It's like everything he's done so far has just been flawless. He's the type of guy that that guys want to be like, that that women want to be with. You know what I mean? That old phrase, like he's just that type of dude. I don't think you could draw up a more perfect college football coach for this era than Dan Lanning. And I think that 133 out of 134 programs would trade, if they were being honest, their head coach for him. Coming into the Big Ten this year, I certainly suspected that they would be 11-1. I thought that Ohio State might be able to catch them out there. They end up not being able to catch them, but they're right where I thought they were going to be, both in recruiting. I thought that they were going to come in and start winning head-to-head battles against Ohio State because of the support that they have behind him. I feel like they have finally been able to get over the hump of the distance that was always something that held them back from getting the best of the best. And they've been able to overcome that hump, and that can be Division Street in addition with the ridiculous recruiting staff that he's assembled, and they are great. There's no doubt about that. I don't like when people totally take away from that, but we're living in a different world. They do have a lot of financial support. It's true, but that's the rules now, and they're doing what a program who wants to be a championship program should be doing, and they're doing it fantastically. They've come in, won the Big Ten in their first year. This matchup, Ohio State, Oregon, in this Rose Bowl, I feel like is so much more than for just this championship this year. Because should Oregon win, they're now the clear champion to win the national championship. And should they do that in year one of the Big Ten, I think you've got a serious power shift in the Big Ten. And in addition, you've got two Big Ten champions in a row, neither of which are Ohio State. That's a bad deal for Buckeye fans.
That's it. That's a very bad deal. I love how you said it, how it's for so much more. I think if Ohio State wins, due to how much they lose this coming season and still some of the questions about their roster and coaching, they don't, become immediately the clear favorite in the Big Ten next year, but they stay floating. They're on top in a floating contest, if that makes sense, where they're not the dominant program, but you beat Oregon. At that point, you're the favorite to win it all, and you're still in a good position. You're in the best position possible naturally. It's just whether you'll take advantage of it or not. But yeah, I think you're right. If Oregon wins here, Dan Lanning is 2-0 against Ryan Day. He advances. Ohio State suffers their first 3-loss season since, not counting 2011 because that's ridiculous, but since I think toward the end of the Tressel era, where they went 10-3 one year. It would not be good because Oregon's brought in a better recruiting class. They have a better transfer portal class. Right now, I would say they have the better staff. And unlike you, good on you for realizing that Oregon this year was going to be a beast. I thought they had the potential for that, but I didn't pick them in the preseason to be this monster. There was a time where I went back and forth thinking that this team had a lot of juice to them so that they could go really far in the playoffs. This is my preseason mindset, but also that they were losing quite a bit from 2023, and they did, and therefore that they would maybe be susceptible to some of the better teams that they played, especially good defenses and teams with really good trench play. But they've kind of reloaded. I don't know if this year's team is better than last year's Oregon team because last year's Oregon offense was really, really good. It was the most efficient offense in the country, only behind LSU's, who had a amazing quarterback. But they've reloaded. And they're using the portal. And like you said, they have a ton of resources. They're recruiting well. They coach well. We know what their identity is. Yeah, they run a lot of eye candy and they have a lot of finesse to them. But against Penn State, to start off the Big Ten championship game, they come out run, tight end pass, touchdown, immediately establishing that, hey, you're not just going to bully us. And even though Penn State, I think, won the trenches in that game, Oregon, they made better decisions. They didn't make the same penalties. They didn't turn over the football. And they ripped through Penn State through the air. They won that air attack. There was no question about it. And that's saying something because while Penn State doesn't have Ohio State's secondary, it's a good secondary. Yeah. And just the way that Oregon has torn through some people this year, even if they didn't beat Ohio State by more than a point and they didn't beat Penn State by more than 8 points, it's impressive because I feel like Oregon's a lot like Ohio State or Penn State or these other teams where they haven't played their best game yet. And I wonder if coming off of the same amount of rest that Ohio State had when they played Tennessee and they had one of their best games of the year, I wonder if Oregon with good coaching might do something similar in the Rose Bowl. That wouldn't shock me, to say the least.
I felt that the first matchup between Ohio State and Oregon, being when it was in the schedule, was a real blessing for Ohio State. They were able to see some glaring deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball. The fact that the Buckeyes front four on defense was able to get no pressure whatsoever on Dylan Gabriel. They had a powwow, the brain trust, and they changed a lot of things, and we've seen them implement a lot of their new strategies from then to now. How they're going to play this, I don't know yet, but I do know Tennessee, with Tennessee's tempo, that they simplified the calls because the guys weren't getting lined up. We saw against Oregon, they weren't ready. They were gassed, so we saw a little more rotation. Which, as you know, you got some deep quality guys on that defensive line, good enough to be able to rotate and give Jack and JT and Ty and Tyleek a breather, and keep them fresh for the end of the game when you really need them. I was very surprised in that first matchup. I felt that Oregon really won both sides of the ball on the trenches, and I did not think that we would see them win both sides of the ball. You have a very, very different, I think, a different impression of these two defensive lines than most. Maybe not the defensive lines, but the defensive ends for sure. Where I think Oregon getting Jordan Birch back, a lot of people are under the impression that these Oregon defensive ends are definitely the better pair when you add him and Mateo Uiagalelei versus Jack and JT Sawyer. You have really come around on Jack being, I think you called him non-negotiable the other day. Tell me what you think about these two defensive lines.
I think that Oregon is straight up better in pass rush. I think that the Michigan game and bits of the Penn State game showed that Ohio State, as we discussed just a few seconds ago about the first Oregon matchup, they still can't get pressure with four. And sometimes they can't even get pressure with blitzes. I mean, that's really the only weakness of this defense. I think that's what leads to some of the attacks on the corners might be more due to pressure than actual corner play. I don't know that for sure, but that's something I might suspect. But I think that Oregon does have some issues in stopping the run that Ohio State doesn't have. And I don't know why exactly that is, but I know that just analytically looking at whether it's Pro Football Focus grades or watching the games, that Ohio State's rushing defense, for whatever reason, is better. I think a large part of it is their safeties, but I also know that Jack Sawyer's a big guy, a fast guy. He's been a good rush defensive end for a few years now. Against Michigan, I called him a non-negotiable because he made that pick. He was the best D lineman in that game. And against Tennessee, I mean, Tennessee's pass rush is bad. This is something that people didn't identify before the Tennessee game. Their tackles were 91st entering the game in quarterback sack percentage. Like the pass rush mismatch actually favored Ohio State in that game. It did not favor Tennessee. But Sawyer still did a really, really good job. And he's been climbing up ever since the start of the year in my mind. And that's kind of really what it is. My thoughts on these D lines. I think that Ohio State's is more of a rushing defensive line overall. I mean, they did a good job against Penn State. They did a good job against Michigan outside of really two plays where Orgy, for whatever reason, confused the defense and Mullings broke through the tackles of an exhausted unit. I mean, this D line's really good at run defense. It's probably Ryan Day's best rushing run defense D line since what, first year when they had all those talent. Oregon is more so pass rush. I mean, they have 40 sacks. Uiagalelei is really good. I think that for OSU in the trenches, it is a concern that Birch is back because Oregon's D-line should be better than it was in that first game, and Ohio State's O-line is definitively worse than it was in that first Oregon game. But the Ohio State D-line can't, it's not a pushover. It's not like it was in 21 or 22 when it was very, very inflated by other factors. It's a legitimate unit. I don't know if I'd say the entire unit is a non-negotiable like Michigan's or maybe in my mind Penn State's defensive line, but it's close. And that's saying something. And it helps that, Cody Simon's an elite player and that their safety room's the best in the nation. All those things make for an elite rushing defense. And when Knowles schemes his blitzes up and the DBs are covering well, that makes for a great pass rush.
Those DBs in matchup number one, not so great. It felt like 4 out of 5 times Gabriel dropped back. There was a wide receiver or a tight end running wide open, and it was incredibly disheartening. We'll see how that turns out this week. But you've already done your prediction, and I'm going out to this game. I sure hope you're not right because you have Oregon winning the game. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes, I have it 31-24. I don't think I'll change who wins. I have to watch film and do more extensive research than I already have before I do the deep dive. I'm pretty confident that Oregon's going to win. Yeah.
Well, that's a heartbreaker. I do want to say that you have identified all year, and I got a lot of heat for this early on in the season, and I'll admit part of it is it takes me a while to warm up to transfers, but Travian Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Travian's RB1. Travian
Yes.
is next level. He can make things happen that Quinshon can't when there's poor blocking up front. And he shows up in every big game. I look for him to show up in this game. You and I both share an affinity for Cody Simon, who I think is one of the most underrated guys on this team. Not just a captain, but the guy's always there making plays. He's an underrated athlete. He's just a fantastic linebacker. So props to you for that. Sam, I'm going to go with Ohio State 38, Oregon 31. I think we're going to be looking at a shootout again. I think that Will Howard is going to have another hot game like he did the first time against them and like he did against Tennessee, as will Dylan Gabriel. But I think this is an even Steven matchup, and it's going to come down to one coaching staff just one up in the other. And I feel like Oregon kind of did that in the first game with that onside kick, for instance, with the Buckeyes where they were ready for it, but it didn't end up going their way. We're going to see something like that, and we're going to go with the Buckeyes winning the Rose Bowl, advancing to play, I believe, Texas, which wouldn't that be a dream scenario? They've got this set up in front of them for a crazy potential walkthrough of matchups moving forward. So does Oregon. But I appreciate you for joining me so much, my man. It was a pleasure talking college football with you. I hope to have you back for the next round to go over what happens.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I hope that I can come back on, and I think that, this is it. It's going to be a pretty close game. I think that, I don't know. I'm very excited. It's going to be the favorite game of mine on New Year's Day. I mean, thankfully we have Notre Dame and Georgia afterwards because we, start off with the games that should be more snoozers, although you never know. And then the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl are much tighter spreads, better average teams, and I'm very pumped for these quarterfinals.
You chose Georgia over Notre Dame in a tight one, is that right?
Yes, 16-14.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people picking Notre Dame in that one. I'm tempted to as well. I haven't decided, but boy, I think it's going to be a low-scoring slugfest, just like you. And I, who comes out on top? I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be a tight one. What I do find interesting is first time in a long time that the general public isn't doubting Notre Dame a lot in a big game, which I think is interesting.
That is that I didn't exactly know that before, but that makes it even more intriguing.
Yeah.
I'm picking Georgia mainly because I feel like I've doubted Smart too much this year, and they've had, closer to a month than not to prepare. Notre Dame lost their best defensive tackle. Georgia has limitations, but so does Georgia. And I think that It'll just be a close game defined by game management and coaching. And Kirby Smart right now is the best in the business at that by a mile.
He is. What's your take on Marcus Freeman?
I think that I think he's done better than Brian Kelly so far. And I know he's only in year 3, whereas Kelly was there for a while. But I think he's brought Notre Dame to a level of success relative to his current era that I don't think Kelly ever achieved. If he beats Georgia, they can absolutely win it all. Because I think they have a little bit of a favorable matchup with Penn State, though that's just intuitively. I'd have to look at that a little bit more. And I mean, their rushing offense, it's crazy what they do. And what some people don't understand as well is Indiana's rushing defense really is that good. Because outside of that 98-yard run they allowed, they only let Notre Dame run for 2.5 yards per carry.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
think many rushing. Yeah, I don't think many rushing defenses could do that to Notre Dame. Even the more talented defenses like the Oregons, the Texases. I don't even know if Ohio State could do that. Well, I mean, maybe we'll find out. Maybe we won't. I think Georgia will be a big will help determine that picture. I think Georgia has a pretty good rushing defense that will slow Notre Dame down, but at the same time, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and that O-line, that entire unit is a non-negotiable. You have to deal with that. You can't take it away entirely. You have to deal with that for 60 minutes.
You know, I was looking at the coaches remaining, and should Georgia not win it, you know, one of these guys is joining Kirby and Dabo as an active national championship coach, and the guys remaining, we've got Marcus Freeman, we've got Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, James Franklin, Kenny Dillingham. Like, it's a really interesting group, and if one of those guys ends up joining, should Georgia fall here, going to be really, really cool going into the offseason and going into next year. And it is still wild, right? That there's, with Mac Brown retiring, just 2 coaches actively. I mean, it's just bizarre.
It's crazy. You know, Saban won so much, and then he retired. Urban Meyer retired years ago, and he won the first college football playoff national championship. You know, Mac Brown won some in the BCS era. He's gone. And then Jim Harbaugh won the 2023 one, and he's off to the NFL. I mean, there's been a lot of change. A lot of change that's occurred to the sport.
For sure. Everybody watching, check out our guy. College Football with Sam does a fantastic job. Full national college football coverage. Really excellent Big Ten coverage when it comes to Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. Best of the best. Really appreciate you coming on, buddy. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Juck, and thank you all for having me on. Thank you, and I hope you all in the comment section, you watching, had an awesome time. So hopefully I'll be back on here to talk with you guys some more.
Thanks, buddy. Have a great day.
You too.
Sam. And thank you so much for joining me, guys. I appreciate you. Please do like the show for me and Mom. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks so much. Juckonbucks out. He needs his vote polled immediately. And I'll say, I don't care. The leader, the boss. Where is Josh Heupel? The largest humans he can find. You got Miami and Georgia and Florida State and Tennessee and Texas A&M. Kirby wants you. LSU and Ole Miss. Not even a football player, but he's 6'10", 334. Kirby said, sign me up. That's all they've got to offer when it comes to a defensive player. What could they possibly say other than, how down do you have to be for a win? Let us pay you. All they got to be is enormous. What could they possibly say? Knock the team out west. Oh, well. They'll take him if they're lowly rated, too. I'm not some guy who's some Big Ten homer. Behind that, I will never find it acceptable. I want to see it, man, because they've got nothing else to go on.